Is your hustle real? Are you really a true hustler? We're going to talk about it on this segment of the Gig Geezer. Again, I ask, are you a hustler? Are you a true hustler? Do you know some of the traits of a true hustler? As a self-employed business person and an independent contractor, we often talk about getting our grind on or getting our hustle on. But do we know what it takes? And I actually believe that this is a term these are terms that are often used rather loosely and inaccurately. Now, I'll ask this first. Is the ability to hustle something that we can learn, or is it something that we're born with? Or is it a little bit of both? Well, I'm going to share my personal experience later on, which may answer that. Now, whenever I hear people talk about as gig delivery drivers that we need to get a job, it often brings me to laughter because these folk often talk out of ignorance or out of jealousy. Hustling, let's face it, hustling is not for everyone. But for the sake of conversation, and as I've mentioned in recent Gig Geezer segments, gig delivery work is not for everybody as well. If one really researches the word hustler, you'll find that there's nearly as many definitions and connotations for the word hustler in a positive light as there is in a negative light. One of the negative connotations of the word hustler is that of being a prostitute. And quite honestly, there are days in which I, not only as a gig delivery driver, but maybe in a couple other sales capacities, in which I felt like a hustler trying to find that next opportunity to make money. But I'm pretty sure that others can relate to this given the current gig economy environment in which we're all talking about how things are rather slow. Some of you may also recall in this particular segment of the Gig Geezer, I derided gig delivery drivers for having sold their souls to DoorDash. And those who I said having sold their souls to DoorDash are those who have maintained acceptance rates of 50% or higher. And I'll even go as far as saying 70, 80, 90% or higher. Those, I believe, are not only are those who have sold their souls, but they are also prostitutes for their pimp, Tony Zhu. But then there are positive connotations of the term hustler, of the word hustler. Words that are used are go-getter and an aggressively enterprising person. And by the way, if this is your first time checking out the Gig Geezer, or if you're a returning visitor of the Gig Geezer, hey, thanks for coming by. And if you would not mind, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your content in the section below. Now I'm going to digress a little bit, and this is a PSA announcement. And the reason why I'm saying this because I think it all ties in, given that it's that time of the year. Today is January 30, 2022. Many of us have begun to see a flow of our 1099 statements and so forth. And what I want to talk about real quick is I recall a recent comment by someone on one of my community page posts in which they said, yeah, you made $300, but in effect, you made $150. You're not even taking into account depreciation, taxes, mileage, your van payment, insurance, and all. Let me share this with you. That is, first of all, a W-2's mindset. A true business person, independent contractor, is not really thinking initially about expenses. What they're thinking about is income earned. They're thinking about earnings, okay? And there's a term, there's a Greek word called oikonomy, which is the word that you get economy. And that word oikonomy means administration. And someone who is a true independent contractor, a true self-employed business person, how they administer their business is up to them. Now, there may be folk who concern themselves with that up front. I, for one, don't concern myself up front, although I keep a very detailed running count of my expenses and so forth. When I share on the Gig Geezer channel about the earnings that I've made, that's what it's all about, is my earnings. I don't care about mileage, although I'm aware of what the mileage is. I don't care about my insurance payments, although I know that that's an expense. Let me share this with you real quick. You talk about depreciation, but there's only one of two things that you can count on taxes. It's going to be mileage or depreciation. If you talk about maintenance and gas and repairs and things like that, you can only count one or the other: gas, maintenance, repairs, or mileage. That's what the IRS says. So you need to keep these kind of things in mind when you try to pose to a person about their expenses and all, and how you try to break down the money that they make. One other thing before I move on with this segment of the Gig Geezer. Even as a W-2, nobody counts your net income when you are applying for credit cards, loans, a vehicle, or a home. It's the same thing with me. With this van here, they did not count my net income. They asked me for some tax statements, my 1040 Schedule C. They wanted to see if I actually earned that money before expenses, before my write-offs, okay? The whole thing about expenses and write-offs is to reduce your taxable income. And that's really what I should have said up front. When you start talking about expenses and all that, that's neither here nor there for at least 11 months out of the year, okay? Expenses only count when you're trying to reduce your taxable income, okay? Now, back to the conversation about W-2s and so forth. Let me just say this. If you make $5,000 a month, okay, and maybe if you're single with zero dependents, it may take you may see an upwards of 25% of your pay go to taxes. So that's $1,250. And let's say on your job, if they offer benefits and all, your medical, your share of the medical, and your share of the ancillary benefits like dental, vision, and maybe AFLAC, or maybe even short and long-term disability, that may come up to $300. So $1,550 that's pre-taxable income, okay? And typically the HR person explains to you that's pre-taxable income, okay? That's pre-taxable. Not pre-taxable income. That is counted as pre-tax. So that lowers your tax obligation, all right? But at the same time, when you apply for that credit card, when you apply for that loan or whatever else, they ask for your gross income. That's income before taxes. Now, moving on. Now, if I happen to lose someone by now, I'm not apologizing, but I am sharing some things that were on my mind as well, in addition to talking about Hustler. And by the way, if you like the content that's been provided in this segment of the Gig Geezer or in any other segment of the Gig Geezer, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. Now, going back, I said that there are some negative connotations of Hustler. Now, some of you may recall in this segment of the Gig Geezer, which I again talked about how I questioned whether have you sold your soul to DoorDash. For illustration purposes, I added a couple of scenes from the 1970s movie Willie Dynamite. And one of those scenes, Willie confronts one of his women, and she hands him some money, and he looks at it and he says, "You call this production? This ain't shit." Okay? That was the start of the scene. But the one that really is more applicable here, now, Willie had attended this meeting among other pimps, and the lead pimp at the time, Bell, was saying that all of them need to organize, they need to collectivize, they need to strategize. And Willie, Willie asking his questions and all, he said, "There's one other problem here. There's one other issue here. His women." And Bell asked, "You can't handle your women?" No, it's not that Willie was saying. Willie was saying his women need whatever territory they see, that should be theirs. And Bell replied, "Well, I respect your ambition, but you need vision." And one of the traits of a one of the traits of a hustler, a true hustler, is someone who is very ambitious, someone who is a go-getter, aggressively enterprising person, as I've said already. So, which side of the ledger do you see yourself on at this juncture? Now, a hustler may be seen as someone who swindles, scams people out of their money. The proper phrasing is that one whose income is derived by illicit or unethical means. Someone who is rather scurrilous. Well, some may say Tony Zhu is like that because he scammed a lot of folk into thinking that they need to do this and do that, but yet DoorDash is a multi-billion-dollar company. Then again, a hustler may be seen as someone who simply works harder than the next person, his competition, or his peers, or her peers, and eventually that person is recognized for their success, for their results. Now, I'm going to digress a little bit and share my personal story here. Now, I have shared with folk how I spent my time at the bowling alleys, how I hustled in my teenager years, my early adult years. First, I started keeping score for leagues, and then when I started bowling for money, I started hustling the leagues. I would come in as a sub and get in the side pots, and that's how oftentimes I made my money. And some people liked seeing me, and there was a lot of folk who didn't like seeing me because they felt that I was hustling them. But I also shared how I learned bowling through a guy named Cleo Hicks. And Cleo, whom I've said may not have been the salt of the earth, Cleo, in the time he spent with me, showed me not only bowling but just life things that I've carried on, that I have applied in my life over the last 40 years, to be honest. Another part of my life is the fact that my mother played the horses. My mother would take us to the racetrack. She didn't take us to the bookie joint, but she would go to the bookie joint. But my early memories was going to Hollywood Park, the old Hollywood Park, which is now that entire property is where the Los Angeles Rams and Los Angeles Chargers, I think that's where they play now. That's where that stadium is. That entire property in part is where Hollywood Park used to be. Well, anyway, whenever she got into a financial tight, she would tell me, I need you to go to the store and give me the newspaper. And that newspaper had the entries and some handicapping synopsis of each horse. And early in the morning, she would listen to the radio show that would give the scratches for the day. Of course, there may be other scratches that would be announced at the racetrack. Well, me being the analytical person that I was, I went beyond those little handicapping sheets. I learned how to read the racing form. I learned the bloodlines of the horses, and I actually did fairly. I mean, by and large, I did okay at the racetrack. In fact, in between jobs, in my early adult years, I actually survived off of, or at least I managed to maintain some money in my pocket by going to the racetrack damn near every day. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but that's where I can identify my hustler type beginnings. But that time at the racetrack and that time at the bowling alley, but let's just say with the racetrack, actually helped me when I became a sports reporter, when I worked at the newspapers, because when I worked in South Florida, I had a chance to cover not only harness racing, but thoroughbred racing. And so I got a chance to cover the big events whenever they came down to South Florida. And a lot of my knowledge, my understanding of thoroughbred racing and harness racing could be attributed to just not only me being just a few years removed from having hung out at the racetrack. So you just never know. As a newspaper reporter, when I think of that aggressive, enterprising person, in the newspaper business, there's what they call enterprise features, and then there are news stories, there are news features, and then there are just regular features. But the major hard hitting stories in the newspaper business, at least when I was in the business, were those enterprising stories. These are stories that you conceive the entire project. You come up with this. You identify something that may have impact in a social economic way, something that may expose corruption, something that may bring awareness to a greater a general readership. And these type of stories sometimes may be well received or not well received. But one story that I can recall, at least one of Enterprise, there's actually two of them, but one of them I recall was back in 1992 from an Atlanta newspaper, and it was called A Decent Job, a Decent Wage. And the Atlanta Journal-Constitution did a story in which they talked to several folk who had been out of work or who had lost their jobs during that recession of that time. And they all talked about the mental anguish and the mental upheaval, the financial upheaval, the financial anguish that they were in. And that was a story that was not written at that time. That was something that was seen as enterprising, giving an actual first person account of what it's like being out of work in those economic times. So that said, what is an enterprising person in terms of being a hustler? That is someone who has resourcefulness, initiative, someone who has the drive to recognize opportunities and the motivation to make the most out of them. And that's something that you have to do in these particular times. You have to recognize your opportunities and make the most of them if you're going to make it work. Instead of talking about how slow it is and how I'm not making any money, find ways to make money. Find ways. Don't stop. Keep it going. So, what are some other things? What are some other characteristics? What are some other traits of being a hustler, a true hustler? So, that person, as I said, takes initiative. That person has drive. That person has determination. That person is someone who's creative in their thinking and someone who makes things happen. They are laser focused. They've got their sights constantly on their goal, their prize, or mainly just goals, okay? They're known to accomplish oftentimes what they set out to do. Then again, these folk have characteristics of caring about helping other people. They're always looking to bring others along. So they're willing to share some of the things that have helped them to bring other folks along. And they dream big. They don't impose limits upon themselves. They're unafraid of risks. Hustlers may fail hard and often, yet they have no problem discussing their failures. They're motivated to get back up. They often learn from their mishaps, and they often get back to working towards their ultimate goal. Hustlers are good at eliminating distractions. Hustlers always are looking ahead. Hustlers push aside distractions. They don't dwell on haters. In fact, they ignore haters. Hustlers don't quit. Hustlers are in it for the long game. Hustlers tend to think outside of the box, which is that enterprising part of them. That's the ones who try to make things happen. They are willing to take chances. And in taking chances, sometimes you have to get beyond the conventional thinking of things. I'll give you a good example of really thinking outside of the box. I have shared when I have accepted orders in which they made no absolute sense. The dollars to mile ratio don't make any sense. But I'm thinking that, hey, because I'm working multiple apps, as I'm driving to that drop-off location or as I'm driving to that pickup location, I'll catch another opportunity. And more times than not, I'm able to get another one that makes sense. And now the dollar to miles ratio makes more sense. And I'm also making money. Hustlers are seen as innovative. Some are accredited as being ahead of their time. Hustlers are constantly making self-assessment and they value self-improvement. Hustlers create their own opportunities. They don't sit around. They're not sitting around. They're constantly looking to make opportunities for themselves and maybe for others. Hustlers are passionate about their pursuits. Some call them trailblazers. Hustlers are seen as mavericks. And that's one I really like. And that's one that actually has personal resonance with me. But also, hustlers are not afraid to think unconventionally, nor are they concerned about being seen as unconventional. And by the way, if you like the content that's been provided in this segment of the Gig Geezer or in any other segment of the Gig Geezer, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome comments in the section below. What I have shared is not the definitive end-all guide of what is a hustler or a true hustler, but my intent is to provoke some thought, some consideration, and reflection, and maybe conversation. And even if you don't check off all the boxes of everything that I've shared in this particular segment of the Gig Geezer, just know that stagnation occurs when you're not moving. So one of the unspoken things of being a true hustler is that they're always in motion, whether physically, mentally, emotionally, and I'll even go as far as to say spiritually. They're never in one spot. They're constantly pressing and striving. And with that, this is yet another segment of the Gig Geezer. I'm Inwood Lane, and as always, may your hustle and may your grind continue.